The ache in my lower back had become as constant as breathing, a dull reminder of the 12-hour shifts that kept me and Oscar afloat. I pressed my palm against the small of my back, feeling the familiar protest of muscles stretched too thin, while balancing a tray of steaming plates on my other arm. The scent of garlic and basil from the kitchen mixed with the sharp tang of cleaning solution, creating an atmosphere that had become my entire world these past 8 months. Ricotta's was the kind of upscale Italian restaurant where Boston's elite came to be seen. The dining room gleamed with polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers that cast warm, golden light over tables dressed in crisp white linens. I moved between them like a ghost, invisible to the guests who discussed million-dollar deals over bottles of wine that cost more than my monthly rent. The purple bruise on my inner wrist throbbed as I set down the osso buco at table 12. I tugged my sleeve lower, grateful for the long-sleeved uniform that hid most of Jason's latest reminders of his displeasure. The couple at the table didn't even glance up as I refilled their water glasses, too absorbed in their conversation about their upcoming trip to the Hamptons. My reflection caught in the mirror-polished surface of a nearby wine glass, and I barely recognized myself. The girl who had once dreamed of art school, who had painted watercolors of sunset over the harbor, had been replaced by this hollow-cheeked woman with shadows under her eyes and bruises hidden beneath careful makeup. Jason had made sure of that transformation, slowly and methodically, stripping away every dream until only survival remained. "Olivia!" Marco's voice cut through my thoughts like a whip crack. The head waiter's dark eyes were sharp with irritation as he gestured toward the back corner of the restaurant. "VIP section. Table 21. And don't mess this up. This guest is important." I nodded, swallowing the familiar taste of anxiety that rose in my throat. VIP guests meant bigger tips, but also higher stakes. One mistake, one spilled drink or delayed order, could cost me this job. And without this job, Oscar and I would be out on the street within a week. The VIP section was separated from the main dining room by frosted glass panels, creating an intimate space where Boston's most powerful men conducted business away from prying eyes. As I approached table 21, my footsteps seemed to echo despite the thick carpet beneath my feet. The table was set for one, the sterling silver gleaming under the soft lighting. I heard his voice before I saw him, and something deep in my chest contracted with recognition. Rich, measured, with just a hint of an accent that spoke of old money and older traditions. The voice that had whispered promises and threats in equal measure, that had once made me feel like the most important person in the world, before it became the soundtrack to my nightmares. When I rounded the corner and finally saw him, the tray in my hands nearly slipped from my grip. Owen Castellano sat with his back to the wall, as he always did, his dark eyes scanning the room with the alertness of a predator even as he appeared relaxed. He wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, the fabric tailored to perfection across his broad shoulders. His black hair was shorter than I remembered, silver threading through the dark strands at his temples. The years had been kind to him, adding authority to features that had always been striking. He looked every inch the successful businessman, from his Italian leather shoes to the expensive watch glinting on his wrist. For a moment, neither of us moved. His eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. I watched as recognition flickered across his features, followed by something darker, more dangerous. His gaze traveled down my body, taking in the cheap uniform, the careful way I held myself, the exhaustion I couldn't quite hide. "Olivia." My name fell from his lips like a prayer or a curse, and the sound of it sent shivers down my spine. No one had said my name quite like that since I'd run from him 3 years ago, carrying nothing but a broken heart, and the growing awareness that loving Owen Castellano was like loving a storm, beautiful, powerful, and ultimately destructive. "Good evening, sir." I forced my voice to remain steady, professional. "May I start you with something to drink?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth, the same smile that had once made me forget every rational thought in my head. Still so formal, Please, sit down. I'm working, sir. I can't. I own a 20% stake in this restaurant. His voice remained conversational, but there was steel underneath. I think they'll understand if their waitress sits down to speak with an investor. My legs felt suddenly weak, and I sank into the chair across from him before I could stop myself. This close, I could smell his cologne, sandalwood and bergamot, expensive and masculine. It brought back memories I'd spent 3 years trying to forget. Lazy Sunday mornings in silk sheets, champagne and strawberries, the weight of his hands on my skin. You look tired, cara mia. His voice was gentle now, concerned, and that somehow made it worse. I preferred his anger to his kindness. Anger I could resist. I'm fine. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. What would you like to order? His eyes dropped to my wrist, where my sleeve had ridden up slightly, exposing the edge of the bruise. When his gaze returned to my face, something cold and deadly had settled in those dark depths. Who did that to you? I don't know what you're talking about. I tugged my sleeve down again, hating the way my hands trembled. Olivia. His voice was soft, almost hypnotic. You know I've always been able to read you like an open book. Don't insult either of us by pretending that's from an accident. The concern in his voice, the way he said my name, it all felt like a trap closing around me. Owen had always been dangerous precisely because he made it so easy to forget how dangerous he was. He could be tender, protective, generous, right up until he reminded you that those same hands capable of such gentleness had also been responsible for unthinkable violence. It's nothing, I whispered, but we both knew it was everything. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with those calculating eyes. Where are you living now? That apartment in Southie? I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The fact that he knew where I lived sent ice through my veins. Of course he knew. Owen Castellano made it his business to know everything about everyone who mattered to him, and despite everything that had happened between us, I apparently still mattered. And Oscar? How is your brother? My blood turned to ice. Leave him out of this. He's 14 now, isn't he? Good age, impressionable. Owen's voice remained conversational, but the threat was unmistakable. Boys that age can get into so much trouble without proper guidance. I stood so quickly the chair scraped against the floor. I need to get back to work. Sit down, Olivia. It wasn't a request. I remained standing, every instinct screaming at me to run. But where could I go? Owen had found me once. He could find me again. And now he'd made it clear that Oscar was on his radar too. You're going to quit this job, he said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. Tonight, and then you're going to come home where you belong. This is my home now. His laugh was soft, almost fond. This? Working yourself to death for tips, hiding bruises from some piece of trash who doesn't know how to treat what belongs to me? This isn't living, cara mia. This is barely surviving. The possessiveness in his voice sent familiar chills down my spine. Owen had never learned the difference between love and ownership, protection and control. In his world, the two were synonymous. I'm not yours anymore, I said, though the words felt hollow even to me. He stood then, moving around the table with that predatory grace I remembered so well. When he stopped in front of me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. You've always been mine, Olivia. His hand came up to cup my cheek, thumb brushing over my skin with devastating gentleness. Running from me doesn't change that. It just means you've been lost for a while. I wanted to pull away, to maintain the distance I'd fought so hard to create. But his touch felt like coming home after years in the wilderness, and I found myself leaning into it, despite every rational thought screaming at me to resist. I can't, I whispered. You can't what? Come home to where you're safe, where you're cherished, where no one will ever lay a hand on you in anger again? His voice dropped lower, more intimate. I know what he's been doing to you, Olivia. And I know you've been protecting that brother of yours, sacrificing yourself to keep him safe. But you don't have to do that anymore. The promise in his voice was seductive, dangerous. Owen had always been my weakness, my fatal flaw. Loving him was like standing too close to a fire, warm and wonderful, until you got burned. My shift isn't over, I said weakly. It is now. He stepped back, and I immediately missed his warmth. Marco will understand, won't you, Marco? I turned to see the head waiter standing nearby, his face pale with recognition and fear. How long had he been listening? Of course, Mr. Castellano. Olivia is free to go whenever you wish. And there it was. The reminder of exactly who Owen was, the power he wielded with a casual word. This wasn't a reunion between former lovers. This was a predator reclaiming his territory. Get your things, Owen said, his tone brooking no argument. It's time to come home. I stood frozen in the VIP section, watching Owen straighten his suit jacket with the same meticulous care he applied to everything in his life. The gesture was so familiar, it made my chest ache with unwanted memories. 3 years ago, I would have found that attention to detail charming, seductive even. Now I recognized it for what it truly was, the behavior of a man who controlled every element of his world, including the people in it. I need to finish my shift, I said, though we both knew it was a desperate lie. Marco had already melted back into the main dining room, probably calling the manager to explain why one of their waitresses was suddenly unavailable. Owen's influence reached into every corner of this city, and tonight I was being reminded of exactly how far. Your shift ended the moment I walked through that door. Owen moved to the window overlooking the harbor, his hands clasped behind his back in a pose I'd seen countless times during our relationship. It was his thinking stance, the position he assumed when calculating his next move in the elaborate chess game that was his life. The purple bruise on my wrist throbbed, and I touched it reflexively. The motion didn't escape Owen's notice. He turned back to me, and the expression on his face sent ice through my veins. I'd seen that look before, usually directed at men who had crossed him in business. Men who often disappeared shortly afterward. What's his name? The question was asked in the same tone he might use to inquire about the weather, but I heard the lethal intent underneath. Owen, don't. I took a step back, my shoulders hitting the frosted glass partition. Just leave it alone. His name, Olivia. There was no warmth in his voice now, no trace of the gentle concern he'd shown moments earlier. This was Owen Castellano, head of the most powerful crime family in New England, and he'd just discovered that someone had damaged his property. Because that's what I was to him, wasn't it? Property. A possession that had escaped and needed to be reclaimed, cataloged, and secured. The realization should have made me angry, should have given me strength to resist. Instead, it made me feel hollow, defeated. Jason Murphy, I whispered, hating myself for the betrayal. But Owen, please. Address? The single word cut through my plea like a blade. I closed my eyes, feeling tears burn behind my lids. South Boston, apartment 4B on Dorchester Street. The words fell from my lips like stones, each one sealing Jason's fate. I should feel guilty about that, shouldn't I? Jason was cruel, violent, but he didn't deserve what Owen would do to him. The strange thing was, I felt nothing. 3 years of hiding, of enduring, of carefully planning every moment to avoid Jason's temper, and now it would all be over by morning. Owen would handle it the way he handled all problems that threatened what he considered his. Permanently. Good girl. The approval in his voice made something warm unfurl in my chest, and I hated myself for the reaction. Marco has sent your personal belongings to my car. We're leaving. I can't just disappear. Oscar is waiting for me at home. He'll worry. The thought of my 14-year-old brother gave me strength. Whatever happened to me, I had to protect him. Oscar will be fine. Owen's voice carried absolute certainty. In fact, he'll be better than fine. I'm having him move to a private school in Connecticut tomorrow. Full scholarship, dormitory living, excellent academics. The kind of opportunity boys like him rarely get. The words hit me like a physical blow. You can't just uproot his entire life. I can do whatever I want, cara mia. And what I want is for Oscar to be safe, educated, and far enough away that he can't be used as leverage against you ever again. Owen moved closer, and I caught that familiar scent of sandalwood and danger. Did you really think I'd leave him in that neighborhood, vulnerable to every piece of street trash looking to get to me through him? The terrible thing was, his logic made sense. Oscar was brilliant, deserving of opportunities I could never give him on a waitress's salary. And with Owen's enemies, his association with me had already painted a target on his back. Still, the casual way Owen rearranged our lives, the assumption that his will was law, made rebellion rise in my throat. What if I refuse? What if I walk out of here right now and disappear again? Owen's smile was sharp as a blade. You won't. How can you be so sure? Because you love that boy more than you love your own freedom. And because you know that my protection is the only thing standing between him and a very dangerous world. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a cell phone, holding it out to me. Call him. Tell him you're safe, that you'll see him soon. I stared at the phone as if it were a snake, and if I don't? Then my men will pick him up anyway, for his own protection, of course. But it will be much more traumatic for him if he thinks something has happened to you. Owen's voice remained pleasant, conversational. Your choice, Olivia. Make the call willingly, or let me handle things my way. My hands shook as I took the phone. Owen had always been a master manipulator, but 3 years ago his methods had been gentler, more seductive. This Owen was harder, more direct. Perhaps my disappearance had taught him that subtlety wasn't always effective. I dialed Oscar's number, praying he wouldn't answer, hoping he'd gone to bed early for once. But his voice came through clear and worried after the second ring. Liv, where are you? You should have been home an hour ago. The concern in his voice nearly broke me. At 14, Oscar had been forced to grow up too quickly, to worry about things no teenager should have to consider. Our parents' death in a car accident when he was 10 had left me as his guardian, responsible for keeping us both afloat in a world that seemed determined to drag us under. I'm fine, Os. Something came up at work. I'm going to be staying somewhere else for a while. What do you mean staying somewhere else? What's going on? The edge of panic in his voice made my chest tighten. Remember when I used to tell you stories about princes and castles? Well, it turns out one of those stories might be coming true. I caught Owen's eye as I spoke, saw the approval there. You're going to get to go to a real school with dormitories and everything, like Harry Potter. Liv, you're scaring me. This isn't like you. Smart boy. Too smart for his own good sometimes. I know this is sudden, but sometimes life changes quickly. Good changes. You're going to love this school and I'll see you very soon. I promise. There was a long pause, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in Oscar's head. This is about him, isn't it? The one you never talk about but dream about sometimes? My throat closed up. Even in sleep, I hadn't been able to escape Owen's hold on me. Just trust me, okay? Have I ever steered you wrong? No, he said quietly. But Liv, be careful. Fairy tales don't always have happy endings. The call ended, and I let the phone fall from nerveless fingers. Owen caught it before it hit the floor, slipping it back into his jacket with practiced ease. He's a smart boy, Owen observed. Smarter than is probably safe. Another reason why distance is necessary. When do I see him again? When I'm satisfied that he's secure and you've readjusted to your proper place in my life. Owen's hand came up to cup my face again, thumb brushing away a tear I didn't realize had fallen. This isn't a punishment, Cara Mia. This is protection. For both of you. It feels like a punishment. Because you've forgotten what it means to be cherished instead of merely endured. His voice grew softer, more intimate. You've been hiding for so long, surviving instead of living. Let me remind you what it feels like to be truly cared for. The promise in his words was seductive, dangerous. Owen had always known exactly how to find the cracks in my armor, the places where loneliness and exhaustion had worn me thin. 3 years of living in survival mode had left me desperate for someone to share the burden, even if that someone came with a price I wasn't sure I could pay. Come. He offered me his arm with old-world courtesy. The car is waiting. I looked around the VIP section one last time, at the elegant table setting and the view of the harbor through the windows. This morning I'd been Olivia Hayes, struggling waitress, sister, survivor. Now I was something else entirely. Owen Castellanos' reclaimed property, whether I wanted to be or not. But as I placed my hand on his arm and felt the solid warmth of him, a treacherous part of me whispered that maybe being his property wasn't the worst fate in the world. Maybe safety, even purchased with freedom, was worth the price. The main dining room fell silent as we walked through it. Conversations died mid-sentence. Silverware paused halfway to mouths. Eyes tracked our progress with the fascination reserved for watching predators in their natural habitat. Owen's presence commanded attention effortlessly, and I found myself straightening my spine, lifting my chin to match his regal bearing. Outside, a black Mercedes waited at the curb, its windows tinted dark enough to hide whatever secrets lay within. A man in an expensive suit held the rear door open, his eyes scanning the street with professional alertness. More security, no doubt. Owen's world was built on layers of protection, concentric circles of loyalty and fear that kept his enemies at bay. After you, Owen murmured, his hand settling on the small of my back to guide me toward the car. I hesitated at the threshold, knowing that once I got in, there would be no going back. Owen seemed to sense my reluctance because his hand pressed more firmly, not forcing but encouraging. It's just a car ride, Cara Mia. Nothing more than that. But we both knew it was everything more than that. It was surrender, capitulation, the end of 3 years of carefully constructed independence. It was stepping back into a world where Owen's will was law, and his protection came with strings that bound as surely as chains. I got into the car. The interior was all leather and luxury, the kind of expensive comfort I'd almost forgotten existed. Owen settled beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, but not quite touching. The door closed with a solid thunk, sealing us inside together. Drive, Owen instructed the man behind the wheel, and Boston began to slide past the windows like a dream. I watched the familiar streets give way to the more exclusive neighborhoods of Beacon Hill, then further out toward the suburbs where old money built its fortresses. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken words, 3 years of separation and everything that had led to it. Why now? I finally asked. You let me go before. Why come for me tonight? Owen was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost contemplative. Because I've spent 3 years learning the difference between wanting something and needing it. And I've discovered that I need you, Olivia. Not just want, need. Like air, like water, like the blood in my veins. He turned to look at me, and something in his eyes made my breath catch. And because I've finally eliminated the last of the threats that made staying with me dangerous for you. The implication hung in the air between us like smoke. Owen's enemies, the rival families and ambitious underlings who had made my presence in his life a liability, were gone, dealt with in whatever brutal, efficient manner Owen employed to solve his problems. How many? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Does it matter? His voice held no remorse, no regret. They were dead men the moment they made you a target. The casualness with which he discussed murder should have horrified me. 3 years ago it had. But 3 years of Jason's casual cruelty, of working myself to exhaustion just to stay afloat, of watching Oscar grow up too fast in a neighborhood where violence was commonplace, all of that had changed something fundamental in me. Maybe I was more like Owen than I wanted to admit. Maybe I understood, finally, that some problems could only be solved with permanent solutions. And Jason, I asked quietly, will be handled tonight. Owen's voice carried absolute certainty. He'll never touch you again. Never touch anyone again. I should protest, should feel something other than this strange sense of relief. But all I felt was tired, bone deep, soul deep tired. Tired of being afraid, tired of hiding, tired of pretending that love and protection didn't sometimes require darkness. The car began to slow, and I looked out to see wrought iron gates opening onto a tree-lined drive. Beyond them, a house rose from manicured grounds like something from a Renaissance painting, all stone and ivy, and windows that glowed warmly in the night. "Welcome home, cara mia," Owen said softly. And despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge of what he was capable of, a part of me whispered that maybe I was. The house was exactly as I remembered it, yet somehow different. 3 years had passed since I'd walked through these halls, since I'd belonged in these rooms, and my absence seemed to echo in every corner. Owen led me through the foyer with its soaring ceiling and marble floors, past the formal living room where we'd once shared quiet evenings, past the dining room where he'd hosted dinners for men whose names appeared in newspapers and obituaries with equal frequency. Everything was pristine, perfectly maintained, as if he'd been expecting my return. The thought sent a chill down my spine. Had he always planned this? Had my 3 years of freedom been an illusion? A game he'd allowed me to play while he patiently waited for the right moment to call me home? "You're thinking too loudly," Owen observed, his hand settling on the small of my back as we climbed the grand staircase. The gesture was achingly familiar, protective and possessive in equal measure. I can practically hear the wheels turning. "This feels like a setup," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Like you planned every detail." "I planned for every contingency," he corrected. "There's a difference. I hoped you'd come home willingly. I prepared for the possibility that you wouldn't." The casual admission sent ice through my veins. And if I'd refused? If I'd run again? Owen paused on the landing, turning to face me. The hallway was dimly lit by crystal sconces that cast warm pools of light on the silk wallpaper. In that golden glow, he looked like something from a Renaissance painting himself. Beautiful, dangerous, utterly compelling. "You wouldn't have gotten far," he said simply. "But it wouldn't have come to that. We both know you're too smart to put Oscar at risk over pride." The truth of it stung, mainly because he was right. Every decision I'd made over the past 3 years had been filtered through one simple question: what was best for Oscar? And if Owen's protection meant safety for my brother, then I'd swallow my pride and whatever remained of my independence. "This way," Owen continued, leading me down a hallway I knew by heart. We passed his study, the library where I'd spent countless hours reading while he worked, the guest rooms that always remained empty because Owen preferred his privacy. At the end of the hall, he stopped before a door I'd hoped never to see again. "My room?" The question came out sharper than I'd intended. "Our room," he corrected, pushing the door open. It's always been our room, cara mia. I've never thought of it any other way. The breath left my lungs in a rush. The room was exactly as I'd left it 3 years ago. My books were still on the nightstand, my jewelry still scattered across the antique vanity. Even the silk robe I'd abandoned in my hasty escape hung in the open armoire, waiting for my return like a loyal servant. You kept everything. The words came out strangled, disbelieving. I told you. I've been waiting for you to come home. Owen moved to the window that overlooked the garden, his profile sharp against the moonlit glass. Did you really think I'd erase you so easily? The sight of my things, perfectly preserved like artifacts in a museum, made something crack inside my chest. It spoke of obsession, of a devotion so complete it bordered on madness. Owen hadn't just missed me. He'd enshrined me, created a shrine to our relationship that he'd tended like a priest serving his god. This isn't healthy, I whispered. Nothing about loving you has ever been healthy. He turned back to me, and the raw honesty in his eyes made my knees weak. You think I don't know that? You think I haven't spent 3 years analyzing every moment of our relationship, dissecting what went wrong, figuring out how to fix it? You can't fix this, Owen. You can't fix us. I backed toward the door, needing space, needing air. What we had was toxic, destructive. That's why I left. No. The single word cut through my protest like a blade. You left because you were scared, because loving me meant accepting parts of yourself you weren't ready to face. His words hit too close to home, struck at truths I'd spent 3 years trying to bury. I left because I couldn't watch you destroy yourself, couldn't be part of a world built on violence and fear. And look where that noble sacrifice got you. Owen's voice turned cold, clinical. 3 years with a man who hits you, working yourself to death for scraps, watching Oscar grow up in a neighborhood where dealers recruit children and bullets fly on weeknights. Was that really better than what I offered you? The question hung between us like a challenge, and I found I couldn't answer it. Because the terrible truth was that it hadn't been better. It had been survival, not living. I'd traded Owen's dangerous love for Jason's casual cruelty, had exchanged protection for punishment. You don't understand, I said weakly. I understand better than you think. Owen moved closer, his steps measured and deliberate. I understand that you thought you were saving me by leaving, that you believed your absence would somehow make me a better man. But all it did was make me a more efficient monster. The admission sent a chill down my spine. What do you mean? I mean that for 3 years I've had nothing to lose, no one to protect, no reason to show mercy or restraint. The man you knew, the one who tried to shield you from the darker aspects of his business, he died the night you left. Owen's voice was matter of fact, as if he were discussing the weather. What rose from his ashes was something much more dangerous. I stared at him, seeing for the first time the changes 3 years had wrought. He was harder now, more polished, but somehow more brutal. The careful restraint he'd once shown, the attempts to keep his violence separate from our relationship, were gone. This Owen accepted his darkness completely, wore it like expensive cologne. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to be honest with you, something I should have done from the beginning. He reached out to touch my face, his thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone. I let you believe you could change me, could save me from what I am. But there is no salvation for men like me, cara mia. There's only acceptance or destruction. His touch was gentle despite his words, and I found myself leaning into it despite every rational thought screaming at me to pull away. This was Owen's greatest weapon, not his violence or his power, but his ability to make me feel cherished even as he systematically dismantled my defenses. And if I can't accept it, I whispered, then we'll both be destroyed. His honesty was brutal, unflinching. Because I won't let you go again, Olivia. I can't. The man I've become isn't capable of that kind of mercy. The words should have terrified me. Instead, they sent a dark thrill through my veins, awakening something I'd thought I'd killed 3 years ago. The part of me that had been drawn to Owen's power, that had found perverse comfort in being the only thing that could bring a dangerous man to his knees. I need time, I said, though we both knew time wouldn't change anything fundamental between us. Time you have, but not distance. Never distance again. Owen's hand moved to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair. You'll stay here with me, where you belong. And slowly, carefully, I'll remind you of all the reasons you fell in love with a monster in the first place. The promise in his voice was seductive, dangerous. But beneath it, I heard something else. Hope. Desperate, almost childlike hope that maybe this time we could make it work, that love could triumph over the darkness that surrounded us. And Oscar? We'll be safe. Safer than he's ever been. I give you my word. Owen's voice carried the weight of absolute truth. But he stays at the school, Olivia, for both your sakes. The world I inhabit isn't safe for children, and I won't make the mistake of putting him at risk again. The separation from my brother would be agony, but I couldn't argue with the logic. Owen's enemies wouldn't hesitate to use a 14-year-old boy as leverage, and I'd rather have Oscar safe and distant than close and in danger. What happens now? I asked, suddenly exhausted by the weight of everything that had changed in a single evening. Now you rest. Tomorrow, we begin again. Owen's smile was soft, almost tender. I know this is overwhelming, Cara Mia. I know you're angry and scared and confused. But I promise you, this time will be different. This time, I won't make the mistake of trying to protect you from who I am. He was right. It was overwhelming. 3 years of carefully constructed independence had crumbled in a matter of hours, leaving me adrift in familiar waters that no longer felt safe to navigate. But underneath the fear and uncertainty, something else was stirring. Relief, perhaps, or recognition. The truth was, I'd never stopped loving Owen Castellano. I'd run from him, hidden from him, built a new life without him. But I'd never stopped loving him. And now, faced with the choice between his dangerous protection and the brutal reality of life without it, the decision felt inevitable. I'll need clothes, I said quietly, and we both understood it for the surrender it was. Already arranged. Your sizes, your style preferences. Everything is in the armoire. Owen's satisfaction was palpable, but he was careful not to show triumph. Mrs. Chen, my housekeeper, has excellent taste. Of course he'd planned for this. Of course he'd known that eventually I'd come home. The inevitability of it should have made me angry, but instead, I felt strangely peaceful, like a bird that had tired of fighting the wind and finally allowed itself to be carried. Owen? I called as he moved toward the door. Yes? Jason Murphy, make it quick. The approval that flashed across his features was swift, savage, and somehow deeply satisfying, because maybe I was more like him than I'd ever wanted to admit. Maybe loving a monster meant becoming one yourself, in small, crucial ways. It will be my pleasure, he said softly, and I believed him completely. After he left, I stood alone in our room. And it was our room, had always been our room despite my 3-year absence, and tried to process what I'd done. In the space of a few hours, I'd surrendered my freedom, signed Oscar's future over to Owen's protection, and given my blessing to murder. I should feel horror, regret, panic. Instead, I felt something dangerously close to relief. The weight I'd been carrying for 3 years, the constant fear, The responsibility, the crushing need to be strong enough for both Oscar and myself, had been lifted from my shoulders and placed in more capable hands. I woke to sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten could be so large, so bright. For a moment, disorientation clouded my thoughts. This wasn't my cramped studio apartment with its single grimy window overlooking the alley. This was silk and luxury, Egyptian cotton sheets that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and the kind of deep, restful sleep I hadn't experienced in 3 years. The events of the previous night came flooding back in waves. Owen, the restaurant, the drive through Boston's elite neighborhoods to this house that had once been my sanctuary and my prison in equal measure. I sat up slowly, my body protesting the movement with aches I'd grown accustomed to ignoring. On the nightstand beside me sat a cup of coffee, still steaming, prepared exactly the way I liked it. 2 sugars, a splash of cream. The sight of it sent an uncomfortable warmth through my chest. Even after 3 years, Owen remembered these tiny details, these small intimacies that had once made me feel so cherished. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, my voice still rough with sleep. Mrs. Chen entered, the same elegant Asian woman who had managed Owen's household during my previous stay. She was perhaps 60, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in an impeccable chignon, and the kind of quiet efficiency that kept Owen's complex life running smoothly. "Good morning, Miss Hayes," she said, her slight accent making my name sound musical. "Mr. Castellano asked me to inform you that he'll be in meetings until this afternoon, but he's arranged for Dr. Martinez to come examine you at 11. "Examine me?" I sat up straighter, clutching the sheet to my chest. "I'm not sick." Mrs. Chen's expression remained neutral, but I caught the flicker of something that might have been sympathy in her dark eyes. "He's concerned about your health, the bruises, the weight loss. He wants to ensure you receive proper care." Of course he did. Owen's protection came with thorough documentation, complete medical evaluations to catalog exactly what damage needed to be repaired. The clinical nature of it should have bothered me, but instead, I felt that same treacherous relief. Someone else was taking charge, making decisions, shouldering responsibilities I'd carried alone for too long. "What happened to Jason Murphy?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Mrs. Chen's expression didn't change. "I'm afraid I don't know anyone by that name, miss." The careful neutrality of her response told me everything I needed to know. Jason was gone, erased from existence with the same efficiency Owen applied to all his problems. I should feel something. Guilt, remorse, horror at the casual way a human life had been extinguished. Instead, I felt nothing but a hollow sort of satisfaction. "There are fresh clothes in the armoire," Mrs. Chen continued smoothly. "Breakfast will be served whenever you're ready. Mr. Castellano has also arranged for you to have access to his private library and the garden. He thought you might enjoy the solitude." The kindness in the gesture caught me off guard. Owen had always paid attention to my needs, my preferences. But this felt different somehow. More careful, more deliberate. As if he were courting me all over again, trying to remind me of all the reasons I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. After Mrs. Chen left, I made my way to the armoire, curious to see what Owen's interpretation of my style preferences looked like after 3 years. The clothes inside were beautiful. Soft cashmere sweaters in jewel tones, perfectly tailored jeans, silk blouses that felt like water against my skin. Everything was my size, my preferred colors, chosen with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of either obsession or genuine care. I selected a cream-colored sweater and dark jeans, marveling at how the expensive fabric felt against skin accustomed to cheap cotton uniforms. In the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized myself. The harsh fluorescent lighting of my apartment had been unkind, but this soft, warm glow revealed that I wasn't quite as hollow-cheeked as I'd thought. With proper rest and nutrition, I might even look healthy again. Dr. Martinez arrived precisely at 11, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and gentle hands. Her examination was thorough but respectful, documenting every bruise, every sign of malnutrition and exhaustion. She asked careful questions about my diet, my sleep patterns, any ongoing pain or discomfort. "Physically, you're remarkably resilient," she concluded, making notes in a leather portfolio. "The bruises will fade within a few weeks. I'm more concerned about the chronic stress indicators, elevated cortisol, disrupted sleep patterns, the kind of hypervigilance that comes from living in constant fear." Her words were clinical, but her tone was compassionate. "I'm prescribing some supplements to address the nutritional deficiencies, and I'd like to see you again in 2 weeks. But what you need most is time, rest, and safety. Mr. Castellano has asked me to emphasize that last point." After she left, I found myself wandering through the house like a ghost, revisiting her former life. Everything was exactly as I remembered. The original Monet in the front hallway, the first edition books in Owen's study, the way afternoon light slanted through the conservatory windows. But I was different now, changed by 3 years of survival, and seeing these familiar spaces through altered eyes was disorienting. The garden drew me like a magnet. It had always been my favorite place in Owen's house, the one space that felt purely mine. He'd had it redesigned according to my wishes during our relationship: English roses climbing white trellises, a small fountain whose gentle splash masked the sound of conversations, stone benches positioned to catch the morning sun. I found Owen there when I finally ventured outside around 2 in the afternoon. He sat on the bench beneath the climbing roses, still wearing his suit from whatever meetings had occupied his morning. But his jacket was draped over the back of the bench, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms marked with scars I remembered tracing with my fingertips. "How do you feel?" he asked without looking up from the tablet in his hands. Some business document, no doubt, requiring his signature or approval. Like I'm living someone else's life. I settled beside him on the bench, careful to maintain distance between us. "Everything feels familiar, but wrong, like déjà vu." "You've changed." Owen set aside the tablet, finally giving me his full attention. 3 years ago, you would have been crying by now. Angry, certainly, but also overwhelmed by what I'd done to Jason Murphy. The casual reference to murder sent an odd thrill through me. Maybe I'm not the same person who left here 3 years ago. "No," Owen agreed, his dark eyes studying my face with unsettling intensity. "You're stronger now. Harder. More like me than you were before." The observation should have been insulting, but it felt like recognition instead. 3 years of surviving Jason's casual cruelty, of protecting Oscar from a world that seemed determined to devour him, had indeed changed me. I'd learned to compartmentalize, to set aside squeamishness in favor of pragmatism. "Is that what you wanted?" I asked. "To make me more like you?" "I wanted you to survive," Owen said simply. Everything else was secondary to that goal. The honesty in his voice was devastating. During our original relationship, Owen had tried to shield me from his darkness, to present himself as something softer than he really was. This version of him offered no such protection, no comfortable illusions about his nature or mine. "Tell me about the school," I said, needing to change the subject before I said something I'd regret. "Where you're sending Oscar." Owen's expression softened slightly. "Pembroke Academy in Connecticut, one of the finest preparatory schools in the country. Small class sizes, excellent college placement record, strong athletics program. Oscar will thrive there. When do I see him? When I'm confident that no one will use him to get to you, or to me." Owen's voice was gentle but implacable. "These things take time, cara mia. Patience." The endearment sent warmth spiraling through my chest, awakening memories I'd tried to bury. The way he'd whispered it against my skin during lazy Sunday mornings. The reverence in his voice when he thought I was sleeping. the possessive tenderness that had made me feel like the most precious thing in his world. "I hate that I missed 3 years of his life because of this," I said, gesturing vaguely at the opulent garden around us. "He needed me, and I wasn't there because I was too proud to accept your protection." "You were there," Owen corrected. "You sacrificed everything for him, your comfort, your safety, your happiness. That's love, Olivia, even if it wasn't the smart choice." His understanding, his refusal to judge me for decisions that had caused us both pain, was more seductive than any physical touch. This was why Owen had been so dangerous to me, not because of his violence or his power, but because of moments like this when he saw me more clearly than I saw myself. "What happens now?" I asked, echoing my question from the night before. "Now you heal. You rest. You remember what it feels like to be cared for instead of merely tolerated." Owen's hand moved to cover mine on the bench between us. "And when you're ready, we'll discuss the future." His touch was warm, familiar, sending electricity up my arm despite my best efforts to remain detached. "What kind of future?" "The kind we should have had 3 years ago, if we'd both been braver." Owen's thumb traced across my knuckles in a gesture so achingly familiar it made my throat close. "I know you're not ready to hear this yet, but I love you, Olivia. I've loved you through 3 years of absence, 3 years of wondering if you were safe, if you were happy, if you even thought of me." The words hit me like a physical blow, stripping away the careful emotional distance I'd been trying to maintain. "Owen." "I'm not asking you to say it back," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking for anything except the chance to prove that this time can be different, that we can be different." "And if we can't?" The question came out in a whisper. "What if we're just as toxic as we were before?" "Then we'll burn together," Owen said with devastating honesty. "But I'd rather burn with you than live without you. These past 3 years have taught me that much." The terrible thing was, I understood exactly what he meant. My time with Jason had been survival, not living. Working at the restaurant, hiding my bruises, counting every penny. That hadn't been a life worth living. It had been an existence, nothing more. "I'm scared," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "Good." Owen's smile was soft, almost tender. "Fear means you understand the stakes. Fear will keep you honest with me, and me honest with you." A comfortable silence settled between us, broken only by the gentle splash of the fountain and the distant sound of traffic from the city beyond Owen's gates. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt something approaching peace. "There's something else we need to discuss," Owen said eventually, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "My business. The family." I tensed, knowing this conversation was inevitable, but dreading it nonetheless. "What about it?" "You can't pretend it doesn't exist anymore, cara mia. If you're going to be part of my life, you need to understand what that means." Owen's dark eyes searched my face. No more willful blindness, no more comfortable ignorance about how I make my money or what I do to protect what's mine. The ultimatum was delivered gently, but it was an ultimatum nonetheless. During our previous relationship, I'd closed my eyes to the darker aspects of Owen's business, content to live in luxury without examining its source too closely. That willful ignorance had been part of what drove me away, the growing realization that my comfort was built on other people's suffering. "I don't know if I can do that," I whispered. "Yes, you can." Owen's confidence was absolute. "Because you already have. You gave me Jason Murphy's address knowing exactly what I'd do with that information. You've already chosen my darkness over your conscience." The words stung because they were true. In that moment at the restaurant, Faced with the choice between abstract moral principles and concrete protection, I'd chosen Owen. I'd chosen violence over vulnerability, and I couldn't pretend otherwise. That was different, I protested weakly. How? Owen's question was gentle but relentless. Because Jason hurt you? Because you wanted him gone? How is that different from any other problem I solve with permanent solutions? I couldn't answer, because there wasn't an answer. At least not one that would preserve my illusion of moral superiority. The truth was that Owen's violence had always been more palatable when it served my interests, when it protected people I cared about from people who threatened them. I need time to think, I said finally. Take all the time you need, Owen replied. But understand that time won't change the fundamental choice in front of you. You can accept me completely, the good and the evil, the protection and the price, or you can leave. But there's no middle ground anymore, Olivia. Not after what we've both been through. The finality in his voice made my chest tight. This wasn't the Owen who had once tried to shield me from harsh realities, who had presented sanitized versions of his business dealings to preserve my comfort. This Owen offered no such mercy, no comfortable lies to ease the burden of loving him. And if I choose to leave, then I'll let you go. The promise was delivered with such sincerity that I believed him completely. But I'll also make sure you understand exactly what you're walking away from. The protection, the resources, the life I can offer you and Oscar. Because next time, cara mia, there won't be another chance. Next time, the choice will be permanent. The weight of that ultimatum settled over me like a blanket, heavy and inescapable. Owen was right. There would be no middle ground this time, no half measures or comfortable compromises. I could accept him completely or lose him forever, and the knowledge that this was my last chance made the decision feel impossibly important. I should check on Oscar, I said, needing space to process everything he'd told me. He's fine, settling in well, according to the headmaster. Apparently, he's already impressed his mathematics instructor and made friends with his roommate. Owen's smile was genuine, almost proud. He's resilient, like his sister. The warmth in his voice when he spoke about Oscar was one of the things that had made me fall in love with him originally. Despite his reputation, despite the violence that surrounded him, Owen had always been protective of the innocent, especially children. It was one of the contradictions that made him so compelling and so dangerous. Can I call him? Not yet. Give him time to adjust, to make this transition without divided loyalties. Owen's voice was gentle but firm. In a few weeks, when he's established himself, we'll arrange a call. But for now, let him focus on his new life. The separation from Oscar was agony, but I couldn't argue with the logic. A clean break was better than the constant emotional tug-of-war that would result from regular contact. Still, the knowledge that I couldn't even hear his voice was another chain binding me to Owen's will. I'm going inside, I said, suddenly exhausted by the weight of all these revelations. Of course. Owen stood as I did, ever the gentleman despite everything else he was. Dinner will be served at 7 if you'd like to join me. If not, Mrs. Chen can bring something to your room. The choice he offered was small, but significant. Another reminder that I still had some agency, even if the larger decisions had been made for me. I'll let you know. Take your time, Owen said softly. I'm not going anywhere. The promise and threat wrapped up in those simple words followed me back into the house, echoing in my mind as I climbed the stairs to our room. Because it was our room now, wasn't it? Whatever reservations I had, whatever moral qualms still plagued me, I'd already crossed the line that mattered most. I'd chosen Owen Castellano over my own freedom, just as I had 3 years ago. The only question now was whether I could live with that choice long enough to discover if love really could triumph over the darkness that surrounded us both. Dinner was served in the smaller dining room, the one Owen used for intimate gatherings rather than business meetings. Crystal stemware caught the light from the chandelier overhead, and the table was set for two with bone china and silver that probably cost more than most people made in a year. The formality of it felt strange after 3 years of eating takeout standing over the kitchen sink, but I found myself sliding back into the rhythms of Owen's world with disturbing ease. He'd changed into dark slacks and a white shirt, the sleeves rolled up and the collar open at the throat. The casual elegance suited him, made him look younger somehow, less like the dangerous businessman, and more like the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. It was a dangerous illusion, and I suspected he knew exactly how appealing it was. "You look beautiful," he said, as I settled into the chair across from him. Mrs. Chen had left us alone for this meal, though I suspected we were far from truly alone in this house. Owen's security was always discreet but omnipresent. "It's the clothes," I replied, smoothing the silk blouse I'd chosen from the armoire. Amazing what proper nutrition and 8 hours of sleep can do. "It's not the clothes." Owen's dark eyes studied my face with unnerving intensity. "It's you without the weight of constant fear. You're starting to remember who you used to be." The observation was uncomfortably accurate. 3 years of hypervigilance had left their mark, but already I could feel some of that tension beginning to ease. The knowledge that I was safe, that Owen's protection surrounded me like armor, was seductive in ways I hadn't expected. "Tell me about the business," I said, as Mrs. Chen's assistant served the first course. "If I'm going to accept this life, I need to understand what it really involves." Owen paused with his wineglass halfway to his lips, surprise flickering across his features. "Are you certain you want to know? Some knowledge can't be unknown, cara mia." "I'm certain." The words came out steadier than I felt. "No more willful ignorance. You were right about that." "Very well." Owen set down his glass and leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more businesslike. "The Castellano family controls the majority of Boston's port traffic, both legal and otherwise. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking. If it comes through Boston Harbor, we take a percentage." The casual way he discussed human trafficking made my stomach clench, but I forced myself to remain still, to listen without judgment. This was what I'd asked for, the unvarnished truth about the man I was choosing to love. "We also have interests in construction, waste management, and several legitimate businesses that serve as both revenue streams and laundering operations." Owen continued his clinical recitation. "The family employs approximately 200 people directly, with perhaps twice that number in subsidiary operations." "And the violence?" I asked, proud that my voice remained steady. "How much of your business requires? Permanent solutions?" "Less than you might think, more than you'd be comfortable with." Owen's honesty was brutal. Violence is expensive and draws unwanted attention, but sometimes it's the only language people understand, especially when they threaten what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice sent an unwelcome thrill through me. "And what exactly is yours? You, Oscar, the family's interests, in that order." Owen's smile was sharp as a blade. "I've learned to prioritize these past 3 years." The implications of that statement hung heavy between us. Owen had always been protective, but this version of him seemed to have refined that protectiveness into something more focused, more ruthless. I was no longer just someone he cared about. I was his primary asset, the thing he would burn the world to protect. "What about your competitors? Other families?" "Eliminated or absorbed." Owen's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing quarterly earnings. "The Torino family controlled the North End until 18 months ago. The Irish mob tried to move into our territory last year. Both organizations no longer exist in any meaningful way." I found myself leaning forward despite my horror. How many people died? Does it matter? Owen's question mirrored the one he'd asked the night before. They were obstacles to our security, threats to our prosperity. They chose their fate when they chose to oppose me. The terrible thing was, his logic made a certain brutal sense. In Owen's world, weakness invited predation. Hesitation meant death. The violence he employed wasn't random or sadistic. It was calculated, efficient, purposeful. That somehow made it worse and more understandable simultaneously. And now? Are we safe? The "we" slipped out before I could stop it, but Owen's expression warmed at the word. As safe as anyone in this business can be. I've spent 3 years consolidating power, eliminating threats, building something that can't be easily destroyed. Owen reached across the table to cover my hand with his. The position we're in now is stronger than it's ever been. His touch was warm, reassuring, and I found myself turning my hand palm up to clasp his fingers. The gesture was automatic, instinctive, and the satisfaction that flashed across Owen's features told me he'd noticed. What about law enforcement? Handled. Owen's smile was almost fond. Boston PD has several officers on my payroll, and the FBI's organized crime task force has been remarkably ineffective lately. Amazing how quickly investigations stall when key evidence goes missing or witnesses relocate to other jurisdictions. The casual corruption should have appalled me, but instead, I felt only a grim sort of admiration for the scope of Owen's influence. He hadn't just built a criminal organization. He'd constructed an entire ecosystem that protected itself through strategic compromises and mutually beneficial arrangements. You've thought of everything, I observed. I've tried to. But there's always risk, cara mia. Always the possibility that someone will get lucky or desperate enough to try something stupid. Owen's expression grew more serious. That's why I need you to understand the precautions we'll have to take, the security measures that will govern our lives. I nodded, though part of me dreaded what was coming next. You'll have a driver whenever you leave the house, and that won't be often at first. Your movements will be monitored, your communications screened. Any new people in your life will be thoroughly vetted before you're allowed contact with them. Owen's voice was gentle but implacable. I know it sounds like a prison, but it's the price of safety in my world. And if I can't live with those restrictions, then you'll learn to. The steel in his voice was unmistakable, because the alternative is making yourself a target for every enemy I've ever made, every ambitious rival looking for leverage against me. I won't lose you again, Olivia. Not to pride, not to principles, and certainly not to bullets meant for me. The vehemence in his voice sent chills down my spine. This wasn't negotiable, wasn't open for discussion. Owen had decided that my safety was worth any sacrifice, including my freedom, and nothing I said would change his mind. What about Oscar? Will he have the same restrictions? Oscar will have protection appropriate to his situation. The school has been thoroughly vetted, and I have people in place to monitor any potential threats. Owen's expression softened slightly when he spoke about my brother. But his distance from our world provides natural insulation. As long as he remains at school, focused on his studies, he should be relatively safe. The "should be" in that statement was less reassuring than Owen probably intended. Nothing in his world came with guarantees, only carefully calculated risks and ruthlessly managed probabilities. I want to see him, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Soon. I need to know he's really okay. In a few weeks, when the initial security assessments are complete. Owen's tone brooked no argument. I understand your concern, but premature contact could jeopardize his safety and yours. Patience, cara mia. The endearment felt like both a caress and a collar, tender and restraining in equal measure. Owen had always been skilled at making his control feel like protection. His possessiveness seemed like devotion. It was one of the things that made him so dangerous, the way he could make submission feel like choice. Tell me about the other families, I said, needing to understand the scope of the world I was entering. the ones who might target us. Most of the serious threats have been neutralized, but there are always ambitious upstarts trying to make their mark. Owen's expression grew more contemplative. The Russians have been quiet lately, but they're never truly dormant. The Colombians are more interested in moving product than territory disputes. The real danger comes from smaller operators who think they can score points by hitting Castellano interests. Like who? Marcus Rivera runs a small outfit in Dorchester. Nothing sophisticated, but he's young and stupid enough to try something dramatic. The Tanaka brothers have been pushing into our territory from the south, testing boundaries. Owen's voice carried the kind of casual menace that made my skin crawl. They'll all be dealt with in due time. The matter-of-fact way he discussed future violence made my stomach churn, but I forced myself to listen without flinching. This was my reality now, the world I'd chosen to inhabit. Better to understand its dangers than pretend they didn't exist. And if something happens to you? The question slipped out before I could stop it, revealing fears I hadn't even acknowledged to myself. Owen's smile was sharp, predatory. Then Marco Benedetti takes over operations, and you and Oscar disappear until things settle down. I've made provisions for every contingency, cara mia. You'll never be unprotected, never be vulnerable. The promise should have been comforting, but instead, it felt like another chain binding me to this life. Even Owen's death wouldn't free me. I'd simply be transferred to another form of protection, another cage lined with silk and justified by necessity. You make it sound like I don't have any choice in the matter. You don't. Owen's honesty was brutal, unflinching. Not anymore. The moment you walked into that restaurant wearing my bruises from another man's hands, your choices became limited. The moment you gave me Jason Murphy's address, they became non-existent. His words hit me like physical blows, stripping away any illusion that I still had agency in this situation. I'd made my choice the night before, perhaps even years before that when I'd first allowed myself to fall in love with a dangerous man. Everything since then had just been the logical conclusion of that original decision. I should hate you for this, I whispered. You should. Owen's agreement was immediate, sincere. But you don't. Because you know, just as I know, that this is where you belong. Not hiding in some dingy apartment, not jumping at shadows, not counting pennies while your brother grows up in a war zone. Here, with me, protected and cherished and safe. The terrible thing was, he was right. Despite everything, the restrictions, the violence, the casual way he'd upended my entire life, I felt safer than I had in years. The constant hypervigilance that had marked my existence with Jason was gone, replaced by the knowledge that Owen's protection surrounded me like armor. I'm still angry, I said, though the words lacked conviction. Good. Anger will keep you sharp, keep you from becoming complacent. Owen lifted my hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to my knuckles. But anger fades, cara mia. Love endures. The gentle touch sent warmth spiraling through my chest, awakening feelings I'd spent 3 years trying to bury. Owen had always known exactly how to touch me, how to make me feel cherished and desired despite the darkness that surrounded us. Don't, I whispered, but I didn't pull away. Don't what? Don't remind you that you used to melt when I touched you like this? Don't acknowledge that your pulse just quickened? That your breathing changed? Owen's voice dropped to that intimate register that had always been my undoing. I know your body better than you do, Olivia. I know every response, every reaction, every place that makes you forget why you should resist me. His words were seduction and threat wrapped together. A reminder of exactly how vulnerable I was to his particular brand of dangerous charm. The worst part was that he was right. My body remembered him with traitor's clarity, responding to his touch despite every rational thought screaming at me to maintain distance. The choice is yours, Owen continued, his thumb tracing circles on the sensitive skin of my wrist. "We can continue this dance, this pretense that you don't want what I'm offering. Or you can admit that some part of you is relieved to be home, relieved to let someone else carry the burden for a while." The offer was tempting, dangerously so. 3 years of being strong, of shouldering every responsibility alone, had left me exhausted in ways I was only now beginning to acknowledge. The idea of surrendering that weight to someone else, even someone as dangerous as Owen, was more seductive than any physical touch. "And if I admit that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Then we stop pretending this is anything other than what it's always been. Inevitable." Owen's smile was gentle, understanding. "You were mine long before you knew what that meant, Olivia." Running from me just delayed the obvious conclusion. The arrogance in his words should have made me angry, but instead, I felt something dangerously close to relief. Because maybe he was right. Maybe all my struggling, all my attempts to build a different life, had been nothing more than an elaborate denial of what I'd always known deep down. I belonged to Owen Castellano, for better or worse. The only question now was whether I could find peace in that surrender, or whether it would ultimately destroy what remained of the woman I'd once been. 8 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my own bakery, flour dusting my apron and the scent of rising dough filling the air around me. The morning sun streamed through large windows that Owen had insisted on for security reasons. No blind spots, complete visibility from the street. But in this moment, watching the golden light dance across marble countertops I'd selected myself, those precautions felt less like imprisonment and more like protection. Sweet provisions had been Owen's idea, though he'd presented it as mine. A small bakery in Beacon Hill, close enough to his house that I could walk to work under discreet supervision, exclusive enough that my clientele would be vetted automatically by virtue of their ability to afford artisanal pastries. It was the perfect solution for a woman who needed purpose, but couldn't be allowed true independence. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see Mrs. Morrison, one of my regular customers, entering with her usual Tuesday morning smile. "Something smells absolutely divine, dear," she said, approaching the display case where perfect croissants and delicate macarons beckoned behind glass. "Pain au chocolat, fresh from the oven," I replied, using tongs to transfer the pastries to a warming display. "And I just finished a batch of lavender shortbread that I think you'll love." These interactions had become the bright spots of my carefully orchestrated days. Mrs. Morrison didn't know that her friendly neighborhood baker was the kept woman of Boston's most dangerous crime lord. To her, I was simply Olivia, the talented young woman who made the best coffee in the city and remembered exactly how she liked her scones. The morning passed in a familiar rhythm of customers and conversation, the kind of normal human interaction that Owen allowed me within carefully controlled parameters. By noon, I'd sold most of my inventory and was already planning tomorrow's menu when I heard the distinctive sound of expensive shoes on the brick sidewalk outside. Owen appeared in the doorway like a vision from another world, his charcoal suit perfectly tailored and his dark hair gleaming in the afternoon light. The few customers remaining in the shop grew quiet, instinctively recognizing predatory power, even if they couldn't identify its source. He commanded attention without effort, drew eyes like a magnet draws iron filings. "Buongiorno, cara mia," he said softly, his voice carrying that familiar note of possession and tenderness. "How was your morning?" "Profitable," I replied, wiping my hands on my apron before moving around the counter to greet him properly. Mrs. Morrison bought 6 lavender shortbreads, and the Hendersons ordered a custom cake for their anniversary. Owen's smile was warm, genuine, the expression he reserved for moments when he was truly proud of me. "Excellent. You've built something beautiful here." The praise sent warmth spiraling through my chest, even though I knew the compliment was calculated. Owen understood exactly how to reinforce the behavior he wanted, how to make his approval feel like the most precious thing in the world. It was manipulation of the highest order, and I was self-aware enough to recognize it, even as I fell under its spell. "Walk with me," he said, offering his arm in that old-world gesture that had always made me feel cherished. "There's something we need to discuss." I glanced around the shop, noting the customers who were trying not to stare, the way conversation had died the moment Owen entered. His presence changed everything, reminded everyone present that this quaint little bakery existed in the shadow of something far more dangerous. "Give me a moment to close up," I said, already untying my apron. "Take your time." Owen moved to study the display case, while I tidied the kitchen and secured the register. His presence in the shop felt both natural and surreal, this dangerous man surrounded by delicate pastries and cheerful yellow walls. The other customers had filtered out during my preparations, probably sensing that whatever conversation was about to take place wasn't meant for civilian ears. By the time I emerged from behind the counter, we were alone except for the silent watcher I knew was positioned somewhere nearby. Owen never traveled without protection. Though his security had become so sophisticated, I rarely noticed it anymore. We walked in comfortable silence through the tree-lined streets of Beacon Hill, past brownstones that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. The neighborhood had become familiar over the past months, its rhythms as predictable as the tide. Morning dog walkers, afternoon nannies with expensive strollers, evening commuters returning from jobs in finance and law. "You've been different lately," Owen observed as we turned onto a quieter side street. "More settled, content even." The observation was accurate, though I wasn't sure how I felt about him noticing. The angry, resentful woman who had re-entered his life 8 months ago had slowly given way to someone more at peace with her circumstances. The constant fear had faded, replaced by something that felt dangerously close to happiness. "Maybe I'm just tired of fighting the inevitable," I said, though we both knew it was more than that. "Or maybe you're finally allowing yourself to admit what you've always known." Owen's voice carried that note of gentle certainty that had always been my weakness. "That this is where you belong. Where you've always belonged." We paused at a small park tucked between 2 historic buildings, its wrought iron benches and carefully maintained flower beds creating an oasis of calm in the urban landscape. Owen guided me to a bench beneath a flowering cherry tree, its pale pink petals drifting down like snow in the afternoon breeze. "There's been a development," he said once we were seated. "Something that changes our situation significantly." The serious tone in his voice sent a chill down my spine. In Owen's world, developments were rarely positive. Changes usually meant danger. "What kind of development?" "Marcus Rivera, the Dorchester outfit I mentioned months ago." Owen's expression grew cold, distant. "He's been making moves, testing our boundaries. Yesterday he made the mistake of sending men to your bakery." Ice flooded my veins. "What do you mean, sending men to my bakery?" "Surveillance, photography, questions about your schedule, your routines." Owen's voice carried lethal calm. "They were gathering intelligence. Cara mia. Preparing for something." The implications hit me like physical blows. My carefully constructed normal life, the illusion of safety I'd built around myself, had been compromised. Worse, I'd been so focused on my own comfort that I hadn't even noticed the threat materializing around me. "Are they?" I started to ask, then stopped. Of course they were dead. In Owen's world, threats to his property were handled with permanent efficiency. "Handled," Owen confirmed, reading my thoughts with unsettling accuracy. "But their presence raises larger questions about Rivera's intentions and capabilities. What does this mean for us?" The question came out smaller than I intended, revealing fears I'd thought I'd conquered. "It means the honeymoon period is over." Owen's honesty was brutal, unflinching. "For 8 months, I've allowed you to maintain the illusion of a normal life. The bakery, the routine, the pretense that you're just another citizen going about her business. But that illusion has made you a target, cara mia. It ends today. The finality in his voice made my chest tight. What are you saying? I'm saying that effective immediately, your security protocols are being upgraded. No more walking to work alone, no more unscheduled errands, no more casual interactions with unvetted individuals. Owen's tone was businesslike, but I caught the underlying concern. The bakery will remain open, but only with appropriate protection. The cage was closing around me again, the brief taste of freedom I'd enjoyed evaporating like morning mist. Part of me wanted to argue, to insist that I could handle the risk, that my life was worth preserving, even if it came with danger. But a larger part recognized the wisdom in Owen's restrictions, the necessity of accepting his protection, even when it felt like imprisonment. For how long? I asked. Until Rivera and his organization are eliminated. Owen's matter-of-fact tone made murder sound like a business merger, which shouldn't take long, now that he's made his intentions clear. The casual way he discussed the destruction of an entire criminal organization should have horrified me. 8 months ago, it would have. But I'd been living in Owen's world long enough to understand its harsh mathematics. Rivera had threatened me, which meant he'd threatened Owen's most valuable possession. In that equation, there was only one possible outcome. And after that? After that, we discuss more permanent arrangements. Owen's hand found mine on the bench between us, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that managed to be both tender and possessive. I've been patient, cara mia. I've given you time to adjust, to remember what we had, to choose this life willingly. But patience has its limits. The word sent a thrill of fear and anticipation through me. What kind of permanent arrangements? Instead of answering, Owen reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box. My breath caught in my throat as he opened it to reveal a ring that could have paid off a small country's debt. The central diamond was flawless, easily 5 carats, surrounded by smaller stones that caught the afternoon light like captured stars. "Marry me," he said simply, his dark eyes never leaving my face. "Not because you have to, not because you're trapped, but because 8 months of living without pretense has reminded us both of what we really want." The proposal hit me like a physical blow, stripping away every careful defense I'd constructed. This wasn't the desperate plea of a man trying to keep his possession from escaping. This was Owen Castellano, who could have any woman in the world, asking me to be his wife because he genuinely believed we belonged together. "Owen," I started, then stopped, unsure what words could possibly encompass everything I was feeling. "I know what you're thinking," he said softly. "You're wondering if this is real love or just sophisticated Stockholm syndrome. You're questioning whether you can build a marriage on foundations of violence and control." His thumb traced across my knuckles in that achingly familiar gesture. "But 8 months of watching you bloom in my protection, 8 months of seeing you become yourself again, has convinced me that some questions don't need answers. They just need acceptance." The terrible thing was, he was right. I had been questioning everything, analyzing every emotion for signs of coercion or manipulation. But sitting here in this peaceful park, Owen's ring catching the light like a promise, I realized that the analysis was irrelevant. What mattered wasn't how I'd gotten here, but whether I wanted to stay. "The bakery," I said weakly, grasping for practical concerns to avoid the emotional ones. "Will continue to operate under your direction, with appropriate security modifications." Owen's smile was patient, understanding. "I'm not asking you to give up the life you've built, cara mia. I'm asking you to let me make it permanent, secure, unassailable." "And Oscar?" "We'll give you away at the wedding, if he chooses." Owen's expression softened when he spoke about my brother. "He's thriving at Pembroke, by the way. Honor roll, varsity soccer team, early acceptance to Harvard's pre-med program. The boy has a bright future ahead of him." The pride in Owen's voice was unmistakable, and I realized that somewhere over the past 8 months, he'd genuinely come to care about Oscar's well-being. Not just as leverage over me, but as a person worthy of protection and opportunity in his own right. "When do I see him again?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "At our engagement party, in 2 weeks. Then again at the wedding, in 6 months. Owen's certainty about my answer was both infuriating and oddly comforting. He's excited to meet the man who's been making his sister happy. "You've already talked to him?" "We video call every Sunday evening." Owen's admission sent warmth spiraling through my chest. "He's intelligent, articulate, and surprisingly wise for his age. You should be proud of the young man he's becoming." The fact that Owen had been maintaining a relationship with Oscar, that he'd taken the time to mentor and guide my brother, revealed depths of genuine care that I hadn't expected. This wasn't just about possessing me. Owen had genuinely embraced the responsibility that came with loving me, including the people I held dear. "He knows about us?" I asked. "He knows that you're safe, happy, and loved by a man who can provide for both of you in ways you never dreamed possible." Owen's voice carried absolute conviction. "He also knows that any threat to either of you would be met with swift and brutal retaliation." The casual reference to violence in the context of family protection should have been jarring, but instead, it felt oddly comforting. Oscar would never have to worry about money, about safety, about opportunities. Owen's protection would surround him like armor, ensuring that he could become whatever he dreamed of being. "This is insane," I whispered, though the words lacked conviction. "This is inevitable," Owen corrected gently. "It's what should have happened 3 years ago, before pride and fear drove us apart." He was right, and we both knew it. Everything that had happened since, my time with Jason, the years of struggle and survival, the violent reclamation that had brought me back into Owen's orbit, had been a detour from this moment, a painful, necessary journey that had taught us both what we truly valued. "The ring is beautiful," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It belonged to my grandmother, one of the few things that survived the old country." Owen's smile was soft, almost vulnerable. "She always said it should go to the woman who could tame the wildness in Castellano men. I think she would have approved of you." The personal history behind the ring made it more than just an expensive bauble. It was a piece of Owen's heritage, a symbol of continuity and tradition in a family built on controlled violence and careful calculation. By offering it to me, he was making me part of that legacy. What if I say no? The question was hypothetical, and we both knew it. "Then I'll wait." Owen's patience was absolute, implacable. "I'll protect you, care for you, love you from whatever distance you require until you're ready to admit what we both already know. And Rivera? We'll die regardless of your answer to my proposal." Owen's voice carried lethal certainty. "His fate was sealed the moment he threatened you. Your decision only determines whether he dies as an obstacle to our future or as punishment for threatening my fiancé." The distinction was purely semantic, but it highlighted the choice Owen was offering me. I could continue living in the liminal space between captivity and partnership, or I could embrace my role as his equal, his partner in the dangerous dance of power and protection that defined his world. I looked down at the ring again, its faceted surface throwing rainbows across my hands. 8 months ago, the sight of it would have filled me with horror, confirmation of every fear about Owen's possessive nature. Now, it looked like what it was, a promise of safety, security, and love in a world that offered none of those things without a price. "Ask me again," I said softly. Owen's smile was radiant, transforming his face from dangerous to beautiful in the space of a heartbeat. "Olivia Hayes, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my equal in all things? Will you let me love you the way you deserve to be loved?" protect you the way you need to be protected, and build something lasting with me despite all the darkness that surrounds us. The proposal was perfect, encompassing everything I needed to hear. Not a demand or an expectation, but a genuine request from a man who understood exactly what he was asking of me. Owen knew the price of loving him, the sacrifices and compromises it required, and he was offering to share that burden rather than simply imposing it. "Yes," I whispered, and the word felt like coming home. Owen slipped the ring onto my finger with hands that trembled slightly, revealing depths of emotion he usually kept carefully hidden. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for this specific moment, this particular woman, this inevitable conclusion to a love story that had always been written in blood and starlight. "Mrs. Castellano," he murmured, testing the sound of it against my ear as he pulled me close. "Not yet," I protested, though the correction lacked any real force. "In every way that matters, you've been mine since the moment you walked back into my life." Owen's arms tightened around me, protective and possessive in equal measure. "The ceremony is just a formality, a public declaration of what we've both known all along." He was right, of course. Somewhere over the past 8 months, I'd stopped being Owen's captive and become his willing partner. The transition had been so gradual I'd barely noticed it happening, but sitting here with his ring on my finger and his arms around me, I couldn't pretend otherwise. "When do we tell Oscar?" I asked, settling into the familiar warmth of Owen's embrace. "Tonight, during our call. I think he'll be pleased. He's been asking when I was going to make an honest woman of his sister." Owen's chuckle was warm, genuine. The boy has surprisingly traditional values for someone his age. The thought of Oscar's approval sent warmth spiraling through my chest. My brother's opinion mattered more than I'd realized, and knowing that he'd already accepted Owen as part of our family made this decision feel less like betrayal and more like homecoming. And the bakery? We'll become Boston's most exclusive patisserie, with a waiting list longer than the governor's inaugural ball. Owen's confidence was absolute. Mrs. Castellano's creations will be the most sought-after delicacies in New England. The future he painted was seductive, dangerous, and utterly compelling. A life where I could pursue my passion while protected by his power, where Oscar could achieve his dreams without worrying about money or safety, where love and violence coexisted in carefully balanced harmony. "I love you," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I've always loved you, even when I hated you for making me love you. And I love you beyond reason, beyond sanity, beyond any hope of redemption." Owen's voice was rough with emotion. "You are my salvation and my damnation, cara mia. The best and worst thing that ever happened to me." The admission was raw, honest, stripping away every pretense and calculation that usually governed our interactions. This was Owen without his armor, vulnerable in the way he only allowed himself to be with me. It was a glimpse of the man beneath the monster, the heart that beat beneath all that carefully controlled violence. As we sat together in that peaceful park, surrounded by the ordinary beauty of a Boston afternoon, I realized that this was what happiness looked like in Owen's world. Not the absence of danger, but the presence of love strong enough to make that danger worthwhile. Not freedom from his control, but partnership in wielding it. 8 months ago, I'd been a broken woman hiding from a dangerous man. Now I was his equal, his chosen partner in building something that could survive in a world that showed no mercy to the weak or unprotected. The transformation should have terrified me, but instead, it felt like finally becoming who I was always meant to be. The ring caught the afternoon light as Owen lifted my hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to the diamond that marked me as his. In 6 months, I would walk down an aisle toward a man capable of incredible violence and tender protection in equal measure. I would promise to love, honor, and cherish someone who had killed for me, who would kill again without hesitation if I was threatened. And for the first time in years, I felt genuinely, completely at peace with the woman I was becoming.